Hello viewers, you join me in Austin, Texas, where I am thrilled to have a conversation with Zara Kay. Welcome, Zara.
Thank you for having me.
So the conference ended, a couple of days ago?
Yeah.
What did you think?
I think it was great. I think there were so many debates or conversations that sparked up from it. But I think for me personally, it was a really great opportunity to kind of debunk a lot of this notion of sheltering Islam specifically, or that it's Islamophobic or it's racist, and countering those points, because as we know it, Christianity went through Enlightenment values, and while small communities and cults in Christianity do have severe repercussions, at large Islam is in dire need of enlightenment. So I think I felt like that added a lot of value to a lot of people who were kind of scared of touching Islam, and I know where they're coming from. So it was nice to be able to have a conversation and to talk to them about how do we approach this? How do we do this together? How do we start, making content or spreading the word wide and far?
And for people who don't know about your story, it's a remarkable story that you shared with the conference. You had quite a dramatic experience involving basically the clamping down of apostasy and the fact that being an atheist can get you in trouble,
Yeah, when I never planned on being an activist. It was my first podcast in 2018 with Atheist Republic and other YouTubers who had a relatively small channel who were also ex-Muslim. And I was like, I don't believe in Islam. And while I never had any severe repercussions with my family, there was this emotional and psychological ins and outs. It wasn't as bad. I felt very privileged and lucky to have a good relationship, but also to be in a Western country and be safe. And until my recent experience in Tanzania, it all kind of broke down, and it was a bit daunting because there were so much lies around why I was there.
You're from Tanzania?
Yes. So I was born and raised in Tanzania, and I left when I was 16. Then I moved around, went to Malaysia, Melbourne, Sydney, the UK, and now in Sweden.
And you were detained?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story because it seems so unrealistic, but it's for somebody who comes from a corrupt country, it's not as shocking. I was basically, it wasn't me being called into the police station, it was my brother. They show him my profile and they're like, we want her. So I go in there and they don't even know my legal name. They don't know what citizenship I have. They don't know anything about me as such. They just know we need to arrest this person with this profile. And they didn't even have any clear charges. And it was a call from the cybercrime office. And I'm like, what are my charges? And they're like, where's your Tanzanian passport? And I'm like, I haven't used it. And they started building up charges. They had, when I got in, they started with something else. And by the time I finished, I was like, what's the clear charge? And they had no answer for me. And they refused to process bail papers because they had no charge sheet.
But for the cyber crimes units to have flagged the whole thing, presumably they thought that what you were doing online was somehow a crime.
Yeah, and a lot of people in Tanzania didn't know who I was, the wider population. It was mostly my community. I didn't think they were capable of doing it. But with my community, I was getting a lot of threats, and they were quite explicit on some small closed groups, and my friends would send it to me. They're like, you should report this to the consulate, and I did that in October. And then I was being stalked by the police for weeks. But the threats were basically on, this woman is in our country and she speaks against religion. We don't like her. And everybody was like, and then screenshotting a lot of my activism posts, or my board holding Allah is gay, and everybody's like, we have to report her. And I wouldn't say hundreds, but tens of people are like, yeah, no, we have to do this. And then that post was removed. And then, the next thing I know, in a couple of weeks or a few weeks, I get a call from the police, and they don't tell me who they are. So they were stalking me. And I was like, please stop harassing me. And I don't know this is the police, right? I have a random call. I'm like, don't harass me. And then I flag it to my brother, and I'm like, something's happening. I'm not sure what this is. Somehow they then put two and two together that if this is the brother, then one way we can bring her in is by luring the brother in. Now my brother, being a Tanzanian citizen, gets a call from the police. He's like, I have to attend this. And they did it during Christmas, which is like, everything's shut. You're not technically working, so what's happening? We managed to move in the date a few days later. My brother gets in, and I was in the car waiting for him. And he's like, Zara, you need to come up, this is about you. And I'm like, why do they want me? And the first thing I did was, tweet something out. And right before I got in and my phone was taken, I pressed tweet. And I'm like, someone must have reported my blasphemous post because I was getting a lot of attack. And then 72 hours later is when I was actually able to talk to the outside world or my friends. But
that tweet where you pressed tweet, didn't that go absolutely mental?
It did, because nobody heard from me. And I've worked with several people, and I met a lot of people here who, some of them knew me by that story. And because a lot of ex-Muslims face, in Muslim majority countries, repercussions where there is no outcome when it comes to blasphemy laws. Now Tanzania don't have those blasphemy laws, but it's not rocket science that they can just put you in and go like, oh well, you're just here now. And Tanzania has a very corrupt justice system, regardless of your belief system, but it's all played by money. So if the Muslims there had money, they technically did do what they wanted with me. I was fortunate to have a lot of support from my family in the country, because a lot of people would have not known how to approach it from the outside. And while I'm largely putting this behind me, I see a lot of these laws being utilized with other women who speak out. They don't have to be ex-Muslims, but anybody who doesn't conform to that community, it is like they're next in the line as well. And they get calls from cybercrime over someone saying, oh, the mosque is too loud, like with the noise at like midnight. And the next thing they know, they get a call from cybercrime.
I think it's a really important way of contextualizing the general struggle with apostasy. In a Jehovah's Witness context, you're looking at crushing penalties in the form of shunning, on a family level. But it's interesting to see that this stuff is scalable, and depending on what the legislation is in a country, I guess in Tanzania they don't have the death penalty, but in other countries they do, don't they?
Absolutely. And it's, like you mentioned, the communities, the shunning, it happens in the West as well, where we do have laws that protect us. However, they can't protect us from our families. When it comes to honor-based abuse, a lot of the people don't even know they're being abused until they're like, hey, this isn't normal. Or, I shouldn't be put through all of this because I decided I didn't believe, or I just don't want to wear a hijab, as simple as that. Or I don't want to get married to my first cousin. And that happens so many times, even in Pakistan. And, I've running the charity that I do, Faithless Hijabi, we get a lot of stories for women and men who've been subjected to that. A lot of real case blasphemy laws in Nigeria, in Iran, where we can't do anything about it no matter how many emails we sent out. But it's so important that we keep rising and raising our voices as well to bring these issues to light, to talk about them, to have other people who don't necessarily come from their background to show solidarity that, hey, we stand with values that people should have the right to speech and that they shouldn't be persecuted for that.
Is it true that the conference received a threat because you were speaking? I heard something about that.
I don't know.
Okay, maybe we can't talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know personally.
Right.
But I did hear of some people threatening and calling up the hotel and whatnot. I don't know if it was about me.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I guess they'll have reasons why they can't divulge everything if the hotel receives a phone call. But
yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Well, I think it's really important to have a conversation about apostasy at an event like this, because apostasy and atheism, they're two different issues in a way. You can be an apostate to Islam and still identify as a Muslim, or still identify, as religious, I should say. You could move to a different religion, for example. You wouldn't automatically by default go from Islam to atheism in all cases. And it's the same with Jehovah's Witnesses. You can apostatize from Jehovah's Witnesses and become a form of Christian. So do you feel it's important that the conversation about apostasy is there when we have this sort of event?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of people online on my platform, when I was talking about it, and I think I may have tagged you in the post, when I was like, we're talking about bringing enlightenment to the Islamic world and how we're in dire need of scraping the word Islamophobia. And a lot of people are like, we don't want this. We're conservatives and we're happy to be that. And I'm like, well, I'm glad I didn't ask you for your permission. But it's so important that, just the mere notion that anybody that touches ex-Muslims are vilified, they're called names, and a lot of time it's so easy to cave in and to give in to those narratives and go like, I'm not going to do any content with ex-Muslims because I will get cancelled because I get a lot of hate. And admittedly, it has happened to a lot of people who have hosted ex-Muslims. However, when we start giving into these ideas, we're kind of being hypocrites to other religions as well. Because if we're talking about one religion and the repercussions of leaving that, why are we turning a blind eye to Islam? Why are we giving into the notion of Islamophobia that not only harms critiques of Islam, ex-Muslim, but also liberal Muslims as well? Liberal Muslims who don't conform to misogynistic values, or Muslims who do stand up with apostates, and they're like, I don't like that you insult Muhammad and Allah, but you deserve to live, and they get a backlash. Or Muslim models, female models, wearing a hijab, they get, if not more, as many death threats as ex-Muslims would. And then when you start calling those death threats as hey, this is like inherent misogynistic ideas from Islam, you're called Islamophobic. And when we stop speaking about it, we're giving ideas more rights than people. Like, no person should be receiving those threats in the first place.
Just for any viewers who are hearing you talk about Islamophobia, I think it's become just part of the language now, and no one's allowed to question it. But the problem with the concept of Islamophobia, I think what you're saying, if I put it in my own words, is that it's holding a set of ideas above criticism. So, Muslims and Islam are two different things. Muslims believe the religion of Islam. If you're going to be hateful towards Muslims, that's clearly bigotry. But it's okay to object to a set of ideas, and you shouldn't be vilified for doing that using a label like Islamophobic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we should also clarify, it's okay to call out bad ideas without dehumanizing people.
Yeah.
Like, so many parents or so many Muslim men have, well, not so many, but there have been denominations of Muslim men that have hurt women before, and we need to start calling those out and where those ideas come from. When the Quran literally has has a verse saying, well, you're allowed to beat your wives if they're not obedient, and people holding to it, I would call them out directly, because it's not about what religion I come from or what religion you come from. Your spiritual journey is yours, but when you start espousing these ideas that are harmful to other people, and to a certain degree to yourself as well, or to your children, even if you have parental authority, that's when I have an issue. Right? That's when I'm like, well, calling out bad behavior from all sides should be done. And the conflation with Islamophobia is, a lot of times when I was Googling the meaning of Islamophobia, and you'd get the same, it's changed into accommodating, irrational fear of people who believe in Islam or Muslims versus, an irrational fear or a fear of Islam, and then anti-Muslim bigotry being a separate topic. Because I think in the West, where the word is used, the word Islamophobia is used, it's kind of, the narrative has been hijacked by a lot of left-leaning liberals to shelter a certain sect of people because they don't want to offend their feelings. But we didn't have that when we had that. We didn't have that word for Christianity.
Christian phobic.
Yeah. It never had that.
Guilty.
Yeah, never had that. And like at some point, we have to realize that we're either being hypocrites when we give into this word, or we're contributing to the oppression of so many people who are suffering at the hands of Islam. In this day and age, like over a tweet, I get headhunted, or that I have had people who are like, "We will behead you over a tweet that doesn't incite hate, a tweet that calls out the hate," and it's crazy that people have gone to so many lengths to try to silence anybody who talks about Islam. And I think that's what we need to continue resisting. I actually had somebody who commented on a post saying, "I'm an atheist, but yeah, Islamophobia is a real thing, and all of this yells Islamophobia because you're only attacking Islam." And I'm like, well, you weren't at the conference. You were not at the conference. It was mostly about Christianity for this year anyway. And then I was like, the one like actually bringing up Islam, but hopefully in the next years we'll have more voices. But at the same time, I can understand how people are like, well, I don't come from Islam. I don't know enough about like the scripture of Islam, so I shouldn't be talking about it. Well, I'm like, well, you've never had FGM done, but you clearly see the harms of it. Then why would you talk about that? Like you see the harm, you see the stats, you see the facts on it. And it's important that we call out these ideas, and that should be consistent throughout all ideas. And that's where my dissent is like, I don't know enough about Islam. And I'm like, but you do know that these laws exist in Islamic countries and where these laws come from. And that you should be talking about it. You should be calling it out no matter what backlash. And we need to, and I think we discussed this briefly before, but like we need to resist this cancel culture of like, hey, if you touch this topic, I'm gonna be canceled. And we need to continue going forward with it. Like I have had Facebook remove my post saying Allah is gay. When there were posts about Jesus is gay, nothing happened. Nothing happened at all. And it is quite hurtful to see that, a lot of the platforms have given into this idea that one specific, religion or sect of people are beyond scrutiny. And that's exactly what I feel creates more distance between the different type of atheists or apostates as well.
Do you think there's a lot of bigotry of low expectations that goes on when it comes to the way, the West approaches Islam and Islamic countries, particularly when it comes to the niqab and hijab? So that you have people saying, for example, well, I wouldn't wear this. I would see it as very misogynistic, and me having to cover my face to appease men in some way. It wouldn't be okay for me, but it's okay for them because it's their culture.
Yeah, I've had that so many times, and there are so many different shades of views in that. And I've evolved a lot of my thinking on it because I had to kind of like take a step back from being an ex-Muslim and going into scripture to what was it like being a young Muslim girl or a child who was, like a 9-year-old who was wearing it. And while I believe representation is important in all areas and that we need to respect adult females' choice to, a relatively degree of choice that they have in wearing that, we can still stop celebrating the hijab as a whole. And I'm very much against the ban of it, even though people think it's for the greater good. I think it only further isolates women who don't have a choice, because as compared to the cross, the hijab means a lot more to Muslim women. It's your whole being. It's like going out without your glasses when you clearly cannot see and need them. It's a crutch, and it's wrong, but the best way forward is to start educating all sides of like, why are we enforcing rape culture and calling it out as it is. Like, why should women cover up if it is supposedly the men's attitudes towards women that we're trying to avoid? And that why are we victim blaming?
You're against Western countries banning hijab, but presumably you wouldn't be against Islamic countries lifting their hijab rules, enforcing hijab. Presumably you'd welcome women in those countries having
absolutely.
the freedom.
Because the whole thing comes down to, do they have a choice to do this? Right? Do they have that choice? So if you look at countries like Dubai, where women can go around in bikinis in some areas and don't have to wear a hijab, like women as a whole, not just Muslim women, but then women still choose to wear it at a certain degree. Obviously there's family pressure and whatnot, but I still feel like that is still a step ahead to give women the choice to pick or not pick versus enforcing it and isolating them in even further. I've personally had cases of girls being homeschooled after the age of 9 or 10 in the West because they don't want them to study with boys, and the brothers are fine. And that just that idea of like schooling, not being around men and whatnot, further tends to isolate women. Now imagine if we banned hijab in these countries. We've not only isolated these women, but we're also contributing to possibly restricting them from leaving houses, because it can happen. It can happen. And that can't, one thing that happened with COVID was there was an increase in domestic violence. So imagine that happening with removing hijab. There are many other scenarios. And it is a tricky line, and this is why I say there's so many different shades of thinking about this. And I think education and empowering women is the best way to get them to stand up for their rights themselves at a fairly older age without going through what could possibly be honor killing.
I think it's easy sometimes to boil things down to like a binary, do we have this or do we not have this situation? And sometimes there's more nuance needed. You need to look at the situation and how it impacts people. When you look at Islam and you look at Christianity, and specifically Jehovah's Witnesses, there are obviously huge differences in terms of beliefs and theology, but there are also commonalities in terms of the way people are controlled and the way people are indoctrinated. Do you think it would be worthwhile activists from different religious backgrounds kind of coming together more and working together more to find these commonalities? And
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely think that as liberal atheists, we owe it to other parts of, apostasy to stand up for those values, regardless of where they come from, regardless of the backlash. And the more we speak out against it together, yes, I know as somebody who isn't an ex-Muslim, you will likely receive threats as well, and you'll likely receive...
I didn't know that. Sorry, let's cancel it.
You will likely receive... They're like, why did you have Zara on the show? Let me educate you. And there is this general anti-white sentiment in Islam, except when you're a convert. Then they'll love bomb you, which is so hypocritical. But you will see a lot of the comments in the tweets that I have with tagging all of you from this conference that, this is like the definition of slavery, or ex-Muslims going into white slavery and whatnot. But those are not the people you're going to convince anyway. Those are not the people that are going to be supportive of those values, because they've already made up their mind. I'm not saying they're beyond redemption. I'm just saying it's not their time right now. But there are so many things that we can raise our voices, but also having the privilege of living in the West and having a somewhat responsive government when we start highlighting, hey, this person in Nigeria is on death row for blasphemy. What is my MP doing about it, and how are they contacting the Nigerian authorities? And that pressure eventually builds up to awareness around the world, and knowing that, our citizens are now complaining about our relationship with Nigeria, for instance. And if we want to tie that relationship, then we need to pressure the authorities there that have imprisoned this person for talking about Muhammad, right? And that is a small step forward, even on the background, to like start pushing this, because start pushing these forms of campaigns, because every life matters. And, you know, the more we do it and the more backlash we get, at some point we're going to reach to a point that they will have to think twice before anybody is arrested. That, you know, people in their very little and subtle ways will be enlightened on some parts of it. Like having a conversation with my dad, who is largely conservative, but I wouldn't say not open-minded. He will listen. He better now than before. And we were talking about burning of the Quran. And he didn't like that I posted a video of somebody else burning of the Quran. I'm like, Dad, did you read what I wrote? And he's like, no. And I'm like, literally, I wrote, well, I wouldn't do this because it gives the Quran much power and I don't have the energy for that. I still support this person's right to burn his own copy, and that my biggest problem or my biggest support would go out to not having him killed, for him to not have those repercussions because it's his copy of a Quran. And my dad was like, oh, but why does he have to do it? And I'm like, well, it's his right, right? It's his right. I'm not saying you have to respect that, you know, his decision to do it, but you have to respect that it's his individuality. But if we go back and talk about what repercussions he would be facing, which is death, you know, or imprisonment, whatnot, is that fair? And he had to think about it. It's like, no, I can't agree with that. I can't agree with that. And, you know, that to me, that was like progress. That was a big progress with somebody who's obviously older and not, you know, in the younger generation where ideas can be swayed in one way. But that was definitely progress on our side, to get people to think that, hey, hang on, let's step back. What are the values you stand for? And you will find some people are like, yes, wife beating is okay. Like, you know, women should be beaten because they don't provide financially, so they must obey their husbands and they must be disciplined. And at some point, it's so tiring to convince those people. You just have to let it be. But sometimes I do always ask the questions, why do you think that is okay to do? And you never know who's listening to the conversation. I think for me personally, the thing that made me start looking into my own religion was the attitudes of other Muslims when it came to equality, or when it came to liberal values, or just humanist values. And that it couldn't settle with me that they were being hateful as people and then quoting religion and having religious scripture supporting their claims. And that's when I started reading more about it. And I decided this isn't what I want to be associated with. This isn't what I want. This isn't who I am. And this isn't something I can be happy with. And it would have largely been a personal choice until I find out that there are real people suffering at our silence. There are real people having consequences because we decided, hey, we shouldn't talk about this. And that's what brings all of us to content creation anyway. How do we move forward? What are we doing next? How are we using our platforms to support people?
Well, speaking of how are we moving forward, that was going to be my question. You said that you'd kind of almost inadvertently got involved in activism.
Yeah.
But what do you think the target is? I mean, it seems such a massive mountain, doesn't it, to liberate an entire demographic of people who are being controlled. Where do you see this going in the future? Do you think we'll ever get to a point where things significantly improve?
I think we're already at a point where things are, you know, tipping the balance off. You know, we've obviously had a lot more haters on Twitter, and that's Twitter. But we've also seen a rise in ex-Muslims. We've also seen a rise in the threats they face, and that just means that we have an opportunity to change this. And to begin with, I would say, well, one, let's look at the countries that are clearly violating human rights. Who are the cases, or who are the people that are being, you know, that are in prison, or, you know, have gone through mob abuse and are in hiding right now? And how do we start supporting them as individuals? And then what do we do at a larger scale to educate more people about these cases? Just bringing out more awareness does so much more change, or it brings so much more benefit to I would say the outside world who don't know what's happening there. You know, they're like, I have had people, literally atheists and liberals, are like, oh, well, you should have known the laws of the country. And that you should have just shut up about your apostasy. Like, why couldn't you do that? Or why did you travel, like when I was arrested? Why did you travel to Tanzania when you knew that, I don't know, for some reason, they were like that you couldn't have 2 passports, which I didn't have 2 passports. And we knew it was all a ruse to like try and get me in. And they're like, don't you know the country's law that you're not allowed to abuse religion? That's not the country's law. Exactly. Yeah. And my platform is my platform. And it has nothing to do with Tanzania. It has everything to do with progress. But having people gaslight us and then feeling alone, like as ex-Muslims in our own island, where it's really hard for people to connect with us because of the obvious threats, it can be quite scary. And that's where I see we can start having immediate changes, which is, while I personally get tired talking about myself, I like talking about these topics. I like discussing them, and I like having my minds changed, and I like changing minds, and I want to do that. So I think, that first step would be probably talking to ex-Muslims about different things or the issues they see. And that sometimes might not be something you agree with, and that's absolutely okay. And I find that with a lot of atheist groups, like, we're not a monolith. We shouldn't be. We should absolutely not be a monolith, because we didn't come out of one religion to get into another idea that restricts us from critical thinking. And we need to accept that people will think differently. And sometimes you might not want to have that energy around you, and that's fine. And that's okay. And that's when you go like, well, I don't agree with you, because I'm a bit of a socialist as well. And, I've had people go like, oh yeah, well, I don't agree with socialism. I'm like, that's okay. Like, that's fine, I'm
definitely picking up that there's no one particular direction politically. You're keen to embrace different sides of the political spectrum.
For me, I've always been left-leaning, but then I have always been a person that is open to having my ideas changed. And that right now, what we talked about, the black and white thinking and polarized views, it becomes so crucial that I stop associating myself with one political narrative and just go like, well, I like this, I'm happy to know more about this idea. And I'm largely moving towards calling myself more apolitical, but it just feels like, I think a lot of people would say, well, that's just escaping it, and maybe that is true. But for me, it's important that no matter what idea comes along, that I'm critically challenging myself in the notions that I hold, that I am able to support the argument I have with any evidence. And at some point, as sometimes it's not rational, but am I okay with accepting that this is the idea that I have, right? And that at some point, will I be willing to change it? And that's something I take great pride in, because like I said, I didn't live Islam to just go into boxes that other people create for me. That I want to be able to challenge any notion of being a certain political affiliate for myself. And I think a lot of people find it really interesting that I've always been so pro-immigration, but also very much pro-integration. And they're not two separate things, but they're also like, I don't want other women in the West or kids to face that they have to wear a hijab because of this. I want to give Muslims who come from war-torn background the opportunity to be in a safe country, while working together with them and deconstructing a lot of the ideas that are harmful to the society. They can have their spiritual beliefs, but I don't want any of their daughters to feel like, oh, well, they're less than a man, right? I want that equality, and I want to work with them to start establishing that. Largely because I was raised, while still in a Muslim family, I was never raised to be half of my brother's worth, right? And we've all been very independent in my family, so it's given me a lot of perspective into how there is denominations of Muslims that are liberal, conservative, or mix and match of the different things, but can be reasoned with.
Yeah. This has been massively helpful, and I'm sure my viewers will be, wow, okay, you've given us a lot to think about, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to conclude, what I typically do when I'm interviewing an ex-Jehovah's Witness is say, if there's any on-the-fence Jehovah's Witnesses who might be watching this, who have doubts, what would be your message to them? Can I ask the same thing from an ex-Muslim perspective? So if there are any Muslims who are watching this video, perhaps curious to figure out, who is this Zara Kay and why is she doing what she's doing, what would be your message to them?
I guess for on-the-fence Muslims, I would definitely say you're on your own journey. Like, don't let other people sway you either way into what you should be thinking about. Think critically about all positions that you have. And it's okay if you decide to remain a Muslim. It's okay. I have had people have come to me and they're like, I read about it and I still want to be a Muslim, but I don't agree with this part. And I would rather be around a world that says, I don't agree with this, but I still like the spirituality side of it. And that's okay for me. And that's okay according to my standards. But I also think that it is a great way to start creating those conversations, and that giving people the freedom of, it's not an either or, and you can create your little bubble and you can do that. What's most important is that you're not hurting other people in that process. That, I have Muslims, or, I wouldn't say all ex-Muslims agree that homosexuality is okay. There possibly are some denominations that don't, or still have some bigoted ideas, because there's a lot to unlearn. And I feel like, okay, you see it this way, it's okay, just don't hurt other people over it. Like, don't dehumanize people over it. You're entitled to your views and opinions, but how you approach them is more important, or what you do, what your actions do to other people is more important. And that's also helped personally my activism to be driven towards ideas versus people. Calling out bad behavior is fine as long as you go and that has been, it's a very easy hole to get into in the Twitter fall, where you start using ad hominems. But yeah, no, it's really helped me understand a bit more about what can we do better to have these conversations with Muslims as well. So yeah, I think I would say, it's okay to follow your own journey, provided that you understand the harm that, certain parts of your idea can cause to other people.
Well, your journey's been fascinating, and I'm really grateful that you've shared some of it with my viewers, and I'm sure it will spark more conversations in the future. Maybe we can have you back on at some point.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much. And
Thanks.
It's been a privilege to be on the forum with you. Viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I certainly have. Don't forget that you can watch similar videos by subscribing to the Lloyd Evans channel. But that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.